The history of the Pittsburgh crime family. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city forged in steel. Beneath the clanging of factory machinery and the grit of coal dust, a violent criminal underworld filled with backdoor deals, blood oaths, and cold ambition once thrived. Being an industrial mecca made Pittsburgh one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And like many cities, Pittsburgh became a hotbed for crime. And during Prohibition, bootlegging, illegal bars, and whiskey smuggling was rampant. The Ohio, Allegheny, and Monongahela rivers made Pittsburgh a convenient transportation hub for illicit booze. The promise of good jobs, along with its bootlegging potential, made Pittsburgh an attractive spot for Italians to migrate to. Pittsburgh ranked third behind Chicago and New York in terms of Italian-American population in the 1940 census. And Pittsburgh has always been a blue-collar city. Grit, work ethic, and quiet strength are part of the local DNA. And oddly enough, that same hard-working blue-collar spirit extended into its criminal underworld. An underworld filled with wise guys, bootleggers, and streetwise hustlers who wrote their own version of the American dream, one racket at a time. Pittsburgh's Mafia history often sits in the shadow of the more famous cities like New York and Chicago, but Steel City mobsters, particularly during the LaRocca era, crafted an organized crime network as influential and complex as any in America. Although the Pittsburgh Mafia would have to make it through its early formative years, filled with unrelenting violence. During the 1910s to the 1940s, hundreds of bodies littered the blood-soaked streets of Pittsburgh as Mafia factions vied for control of various rackets and bootlegging routes. The Pittsburgh crime family's origins trace to waves of Italian immigrants from Sicily and Calabria who arrived in western Pennsylvania during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, drawn by industrial opportunities in steel production and coal mining. These migrants, often from impoverished rural backgrounds, settled in ethnic enclaves such as Pittsburgh's Bloomfield neighborhood, known as Little Italy, and surrounding areas, forming tight-knit communities that provided both social support and a fertile ground for criminal networks. Largely independent mafia organizations sprang up in the Italian and Sicilian immigrant communities in western Pennsylvania. These criminal groups were highly segregated in Pittsburgh, and they were divided into two ethnic factions, the Sicilian Mafia and the Neapolitan Camorra. The Sicilian clans controlled the north and south sides, the Neapolitan clans controlled the Central Hill District and the East End, while the Calabrian criminal network, which took root in the mining communities, existed throughout the region. These divisions fueled sporadic violence over control of rackets operating on bordering territory where gangs vied for dominance through intimidation and alliances with local politicians and police. Gang activities centered on usury and vice. Illegal gambling dens proliferated in ethnic enclaves, offering games of chance such as faro, dice, and primitive policy lotteries that appealed to steelworkers' limited disposable income. And just like every other major city in this country, the Italian immigrant communities were plagued with black hand extortionists. But in Pittsburgh, they were called something else. They were called the Society of the Banana. That term may earn a chuckle from folks like you and me, but to an Italian immigrant in Pittsburgh around the turn of a century, it terrified them. Several men from Termini Imerese, Sicily, immigrated to the United States and sold fruit and vegetables. They owned businesses in New Orleans, Boston, Toronto, Cleveland, and Chicago, and in smaller towns littered all over the country and with large populations settling in Pennsylvania. At the turn of the 20th century, selling fresh fruits and vegetables was a cutthroat business, literally. It was a fragile product made shippable by steam power and tight schedules. Products that will rot while the parties argue over terms are subject to extortion at every point along the transit path where a delay can be engineered. Fruit dealers had to be tough and ruthless. Italian fruit dealers would sometimes get into it, battling it out for fruit dealing supremacy. With Italians back then, a man's honor would oftentimes be tied in with their business, so every now and then this would lead to guys fighting to the death over fruit. A prominent fruit dealer named Salvatore Catanzaro, largely regarded as Pittsburgh's first Mafia Don, sustained life-threatening injuries in a knife fight against an industry competitor in 1892. It appears that this network of Sicilian fruit dealers from Termini Imerese doubled as extortionists when their shops were closed during their off hours, and used blackhand tactics on their fellow immigrant business owners under a veil of anonymity. And many of these fruit peddling blackhanders were mafiosi. And these fruit dealing mafiosi extortionists from Termini formed a coalition of sorts and called it the Society of the Banana. And just like any other Black Hand victim, society victims received escalating threats of killings, kidnappings, and bombings in the form of illustrated letters demanding payment. The drawings of skulls, weapons, blood, and black hands on the letters were crude but effective. Two of Pittsburgh's most prominent fruit-dealing mafiosi were Catanzaro, like I mentioned, and Salvatore Catanzaro, who Nicola Gentile described as the leader of the Mafia Council in the greater Pittsburgh area. He owned a fruit store in Apollo, Pennsylvania, along with two of his brothers. Catanzaro started his fruit and produce company with his brother in downtown Pittsburgh in 1888 and earned the moniker as Pittsburgh's Banana King because he was the largest distributor of bananas. His thriving fruit business was mainly due to his cutthroat tactics. Catanzaro served as the treasurer for the Italian Red Cross Society and also worked closely with the bosses from the Sicilian Mafia Council. And it appears Catanzaro got stabbed again. In 1914, after being injured in a knife attack, Catanzaro stepped down as boss. He later died on February 17, 1916. This allowed Catanzaro's protege, Giorgio Conti, to assume control of his crime family based in the Hill District. Giorgio Conti was a duplicitous underworld leader and an unscrupulous businessman. His treachery appears to have been repaid through his assassination at the dawn of the U.S. Prohibition era. Conti's business was Pittsburgh Wine and Liquors, and it did well. Nicola Gentile, whose memoirs recounted many events in the early U.S. Mafia history, joined Conti in Pittsburgh in 1915. Conti and Gentile waged a war against the Neapolitan factions, which successfully resulted in them either joining the Sicilians or disbanding. By about 1917, most Neapolitan and Calabrian gangs had been incorporated into a regional Sicilian-dominated network. So over time, all the various mafia entities all merged into one single crime family. The family's territory expanded east through Altoona, Pennsylvania, northwest into Youngstown, Ohio, and west and south into the Chester, Wheeling, and Morgantown areas of West Virginia. Then, in the spring of 1918, Gentile and two of his grocery business partners were convicted of conspiring to defraud their suppliers out of $22,000 in produce. Conti pressured successful fruit merchant J.C. Catalano to provide the $4,000 bail for Gentile's release, which he reluctantly did. Once out of prison, Gentile was out of here. He left the country to return to Sicily, and Catalano's bail was forfeited. The merchant demanded that Conti personally compensate him for the loss or acquire repayment through Gentile, and Conti stalled for time. Then, the following year, the Wartime Prohibition Act made the sale, manufacture, and transport of alcoholic beverages illegal. That was a wrap for Conti. That closed his legitimate business. Conti then took advantage of his business partners by selling large quantities of mislabeled liquor. He ripped them off of $5,500 by convincing them that the 110 cases of bottled river water was actually 110 cases of whiskey. His plan was to take the money and run, because he then sold his business and was preparing to hightail it back to Sicily. Conti and his wife obtained passports on September 12, 1919, telling everyone that they needed to return to Italy immediately to settle his wife's family's estate. Conti was also trying to sell his car before he took off. On the eve of their departure from Pittsburgh, Giorgio Conti was showing his car to what he thought was an interested buyer. And as soon as he sat down in the car, he was shot 4 times through the back and killed. Although the murder went unsolved, there was no shortage of suspects, the two biggest being the guys he sold the fake whiskey to, and J.C. Catalano, the guy who got stiffed on the bail money. Then it appears that Catanzaro's fruit merchant buddy, Apollo-based mafia elder statesman and leader of the Sicilian Mafia Council, Salvatore Catanzaro, took over after Conti's death. Even with the onset of Prohibition, things were relatively calm with Calderone at the helm. I'm sure no one expected the violence to reach the level that it did once he was gone. Pittsburgh in the 1920s and 30s was a crowded and dirty place. The city was home to 669,000 people, making it the 10th largest metropolis in the United States in 1930. Train sheds, railroad tracks, and industrial facilities jammed what is now a tree-filled Point Square Park. Greenery didn't stand a chance. Steel mills, freight yards, and gas storage tanks dominated the riverfronts. The promise of opportunity had lured these people to Pittsburgh, and so they worked, often as laborers in mills and factories where jobs were difficult and dangerous. So it's no surprise Pittsburgh turned into a city that loves its beer and whiskey. And so you can imagine what happened when Prohibition became the law of the land. Pittsburghers didn't stop drinking, they simply got creative in how they obtained alcohol. It didn't take long until Pittsburgh boasted 2,500 illegal taverns, many of which operated so openly that one newspaper declared, These aren't speakeasies, but yellouts. If somebody needed a drink, with the city's estimated 2,000 speakeasies, such places, though illegal, were easy to find. Police and politicians turned a blind eye for a price. Corruption was rampant. It seemed as though everyone, from the beat cop to the city's mayor, was on the take. Bootlegging was becoming widespread and proved to be a profitable business. Its practitioners often drove expensive cars and wore flashy clothes in a time when many people had trouble paying rent. On the flip side of the coin, they also tended to get shot, stabbed, strangled, blown up, their bodies stuffed in barrels, and on occasion decapitated. And as bootlegging operations expanded throughout the U.S., violence erupted as criminals fought for dominance. Within the city of Pittsburgh, Italian neighborhoods became battlegrounds as mafia factions fought for territorial control over bootlegging rackets. Particularly dark and bloody was the 5-year period that began in 1927 and ended in 1932. Gangsters were slain on street corners, in front of hospitals, in homes, and in cars. And as for the killers, well, let's just say that justice took an extended vacation. It was recorded that between 1926 and 1933, there were over 200 murders in Allegheny County alone. By 1925, Calderone retired and Stefano Monastero became the new boss of the Pittsburgh family. Stefano and his brother Sam headed the largest organized gang and controlled a large network of bootlegging supplies throughout several warehouses on Pittsburgh's north side. The Monasteros brothers were particularly ruthless with their rivals. During his reign, Stefano Monastero was suspected of ordering the bombings of rival bootlegging facilities as well as the murder of a few of his rivals. The Monastero brothers' arch nemesis at the time was Luigi Lamandola, nicknamed Big Gorilla because of his size and shape. He was 5'8" and weighed 224 pounds. He was a brutal Prohibition-era gang leader who held a monopoly on moonshine liquor distribution in Pittsburgh's Hill District and used threats of violence and a fair amount of actual violence to maintain that monopoly. Interestingly, when Lamandola went out, he carried a sword cane with him. With a touch of a button, the outer cane covering fell away to reveal a 15-inch blade. In 1925, Lamandola established a speakeasy on Chatham Street in the Hill District and demanded that all other speakeasy owners have to buy their booze from him. Those who refused were beaten or killed and their whiskey runners hijacked. Lamandola's time as a top Pittsburgh bootlegger was brief. On a warm May evening in 1927, after he locked up his restaurant and continued to relax in the establishment with a couple of business partners, a large touring car with curtained windows pulled up in front. 2 men got out and tapped on the restaurant's front window and called out for Lamandola to come outside. As soon as the Big Gorilla made it to the doorway, the 2 who tapped on the window ducked behind the car and 2 others pointed their shotguns at Lamandola through the car window curtains and opened fire. The shotgun blast shattered Lamandola's head. The damage done left the impression that a machine gun was used. The local press initially proclaimed that the incident was the city's first underworld assassination to involve machine guns. The newspapers subsequently backed off the machine gun claim when law enforcement concluded that a shotgun was the instrument of death. Another Monastero rival, Joe Pangallo, controlled the Hill District rackets. The brothers strapped a bomb to the bottom of his car and Pangallo was blasted from it on September 19, 1927. Although severely wounded, he survived. Another Monastero rival was Morris Curran. When his moonshine business inched onto Monastero's turf, Curran's 3-story headquarters was leveled by a bomb. The Monastero's rule began to fall apart in 1929. On August 6th of that year, the brothers were ambushed in front of St. John's General Hospital on the north side. A shotgun blast killed Stefano. Pittsburgh police suspected Joe Pangallo was responsible for ordering Monastero's murder, but were unable to prove it. Sam escaped to carry on the family business, at least for a short while. On March 18, 1930, his body was pulled from the back seat of his Buick Club Coupe, which had been run off of Jack's Run Road near Bellevue. Sam's necktie was twisted tightly around his neck, and a towel had been stuffed in his mouth. After Monastero's murder, Giuseppe Siragusa became the new boss of the Pittsburgh family. Siragusa immigrated from Sicily in 1910 at the age of 18 and landed in Brooklyn, New York, and later settled in Pittsburgh, where he became involved with gambling and extortion, and then later in manufactured and traded in illegal alcohol. Siragusa worked with Joe Bonanno in establishing liquor distilleries near the city during Prohibition, and he maintained a close alliance with the Castellamarese clan in New York City and paid tribute to the clan's boss, Salvatore Maranzano. He was nicknamed the Yeast Baron after becoming one of the largest suppliers of yeast to illegal beer makers in the area, and he lived in an expensive house in Squirrel Hill. Just because the Monastero brothers were dead didn't mean the violence was going to stop. And next came one of the era's most gruesome murders. A hard-luck booze runner named William Stuttering Bill Gregory was tortured, killed, and beheaded after stealing a load of bootleg alcohol. His murdered body was found stuffed in a barrel in Penn Township on April 1st, 1930. With these murders, Saragusa proved as ruthless as the Monastero brothers, because violence reached a shocking level on Saturday morning, October 4th, 1930. Shortly after 9 o'clock, gunmen walked into the LaBianco brothers grocery store in Braddock and shot to death 4 people, including owners Carmen and Joseph LaBianco and Joseph's pregnant wife, Mary. The couple's unborn child could not be saved. The next to die was Jack Palmer. The racketeer was shot in the head in front of a Wiley Avenue grocery store. Less than a day later, Palmer's partner, named Severio Toto Amorosa, was found strangled to death and his body set on fire. By then, the press was keeping a tally of Allegheny County's unsolved gangland murders. Palmer was victim 91 and Amorosa 92. Saragusa gained a bit of prestige when Maranzano's rival, Joe the Boss Masseria, was killed, and Maranzano won the war and was declared the new boss of bosses. The feeling was short-lived, however, when Maranzano met a violent end with a murder engineered by mob up-and-comer Lucky Luciano. And it was Saragusa's loyalty to Maranzano that led Luciano to plan out his murder as well. Just 3 days after the murder of Maranzano, a hit team was dispatched from New York, who found Saragusa preparing to shave in his basement. He was shot 5 times and killed. When police found his corpse, his pet parrot Polly could be heard in a nearby cage repeating, "Poor Joe, poor Joe," over and over again. His murder was part of the purge of the Mustache Pete Maranzano supporters by the Italian-American Young Turks. Through all the murder, and one low-key racketeer was able to steer clear of trouble, bullets, and knives even as his wealth and influence grew. The time had come for a quiet, unassuming man named John Bazzano to emerge and become Pittsburgh's underworld leader. Bazzano's reign was short and would be defined by his feud with the Volpe brothers. Bazzano immigrated from Calabria to the United States in 1909 as a young man and lived in West Virginia and then Johnstown, Pennsylvania, working as a laborer and then a clerk. He became a U.S. citizen in 1916, enlisted in the military, and served in World War I. After serving in the war, Bazzano married, and he and his wife Rose moved to Pittsburgh by 1930. Bazzano listed himself as a retail merchant. Once all settled in Pittsburgh, Bazzano tried his hand in bootlegging, and he turned out to be an excellent criminal. Bazzano built a bootlegging empire selling yeast and sugar to home breweries, which allowed them to manufacture illegal beer. He was a protege of early Pittsburgh mobster Nicola Gentile and learned to keep a low profile. He owned the Rome Coffee Shop in Middle Hill and had a mansion in Mount Lebanon, a neighborhood outside Pittsburgh. His ascension to power positioned himself against the established influence of the Volpe brothers, who had dominated bootlegging operations in areas like Wilmerding and Turtle Creek during Prohibition. Volpe family members began arriving in the United States in the 1910s when Italian immigration to the United States was at its peak. By 1920, the family, which then boasted 8 sons, began selling grapes and groceries, and that naturally evolved into winemaking. In this world of corruption and vice, the Volpe brothers came to power and prominence. They controlled, protected, and dominated one small community, a cluster of Italian families living in the shadow of George Westinghouse's massive air brake factory in a small town of Wilmerding, 14 miles from Pittsburgh. The Volpes were shrewd and generous and often ruthless in how they used that control, and were able to leverage their influence into political strength that helped them defeat their rivals. And eventually, they would be drawn into the illegal booze trade in Pittsburgh. Led by the oldest brother John Volpe, they operated a distribution hub at Middle and Bridge Streets in Wilmerding, sourcing and supplying illegal alcohol across the region, with operations expanding by 1932 to encompass Pittsburgh's East End, Downtown, Oakland, Bloomfield, East Liberty, Ship District, and Hill District. This territorial control solidified their position as a primary supplier of prohibited alcohol, evading federal raids through local networks and amassing wealth from the lucrative trade. Pittsburgh has never before seen anything like the Volpe brothers. By 1932, they had become dominant in the deadly business of supplying alcohol to Pittsburghers who had been told a dozen years earlier they had to do without. Bolstered by an entrenched political influence, particularly in Wilmerding's 4th Ward, where they secured Republican electoral majorities, the Volpes cultivated alliances with corrupt officials, including an assistant district attorney and police superintendent who attended family events as late as 1929. These connections shielded their enterprise from police interference, allowing them to expand into extortion and other vice rackets. They were considered leaders of the Neapolitan faction and controlled legal rackets throughout Turtle Creek Valley and Wilmerding. The Volpes' political clout took a major hit after the primary elections in September of 1931. They were able to build their influence by hand-picking politicians for office in their home ward, the 4th. After the September 31 primary elections, the Volpe organization received an overwhelming majority victory, which was good news for the Volpe organization. Too good, it turned out. People started getting suspicious and the results seemed a bit fishy, partly because they weren't available until 48 hours after the polls were closed. This prompted officials to impound the 4th Ward ballot box. The independents charged Volpe forces with stuffing 300 ballots into the 4th Ward ballot box before the polls opened on election day. On top of that, they said a number of voters didn't even exist. As proof, the independents mailed registered letters to all voters in the district. 125 were returned because the mail carriers couldn't find the people addressed, and miraculously 4 deceased people managed to vote. Volpe's explanation was that these people did exist, they were just afraid to receive mail. Some of the people become, frightened when they see the mail, John Volpe explained at the hearing. They think that somebody's going to kill them. They do not like to receive the mail. That explanation fell flat. 2 federal judges disagreed. They purged more than 150 votes from the 4th Ward list. Trouble was anticipated in the subsequent election several weeks later, and 25 deputies were brought in to guard the Wilmerding polls. The results were shocking. In the 4th Ward, only 466 votes were cast, all by living voters, and the Volpes were swept from power for the first time in 10 years. Wallowing in self-pity, however, was not the Volpe way. It wasn't their style. The brothers followed up their dramatic 1931 setback with an equally dramatic and ambitious move. They came to Pittsburgh with the idea of muscling in on territory loosely guarded by other racketeers. And within a few months, the Volpe plan seemed to be working. The brothers had taken over rackets in the city's East End and they meant business. They were moving into downtown, Oakland, Bloomfield, East Liberty, the Strip District, and the Hill District. And by the spring of 1932, the Volpes decided it was time to really flex some muscle. John Volpe called a meeting of city racketeers at a downtown hotel. Invitations were sent to approximately 100 Pittsburgh liquor dealers. About half showed up. It seems that John Volpe wanted to raise his prices, but he didn't want to be the only one, so he tried to rally all the other bootleggers to do the same. He demanded that the gathered bootleggers adopt a price schedule he proposed. Rates were going up, he said. And when the Northside racketeers objected, John Volpe told them that they should go along with it, or else. Go to hell, replied the Northsiders. There was one racketeer, however, that decided to work with the Volpes. And that was John Bazzano, the unassuming man who, after the deaths of Jack Palmer and Joe Saragusa, had risen to the top of Pittsburgh's racket scene. And it wouldn't be long until newspapers identified Bazzano as the executive head of the Volpe organization. The move was a head-scratcher to many of the Northside racketeers. In hindsight, it appears to be nothing more than a chess move, a strategic maneuver highlighted by the expression that one must keep their friends close but their enemies closer. By the spring of 1932, Bazzano's Rome coffee shop was serving as the headquarters or a meeting place for the Volpe brothers, who had become increasingly ambitious. They had already invaded the north side, purchasing an interest in a couple key locations, a defiant move indeed, and they had to know it would anger and alarm some very dangerous men. But care? They did not. It's apparent the Volpes gave zero fucks because their faction then expanded aggressively into Bazzano's core territories in East Liberty and the North Side. Naturally, Bazzano blew his stack. This created a conflict, sparking territorial disputes over liquor distribution and extortion rackets that escalated into open hostility. Despite their arrangement as allies, the brothers would not relent. The stark contrast between the way Bazzano and the Volpe brothers carry themselves is now on full display. Bazzano was a sly, low-key gangster who preferred to operate in the shadows, while the Volpe brothers, on the other hand, were loud and aggressive and were pretty open about their intentions. And they intended to take over everything, and they wouldn't stop until Pittsburgh was theirs. And if you're in the way and your last name isn't Volpe, then get ready, because them boys are coming for you. No doubt the Volpe brothers were a problem, but at this point they're predictable. Bazzano was not. He was a quiet strategist and a fearless tactician capable of just about anything and is liable to strike when you least expect it. And July 29, 1932 was a day the Volpe brothers were not expecting it. That afternoon, John Volpe entered the Rome coffee shop, which served as the headquarters for his racket operations. Inside were James and Arthur Volpe, two of John's 6 remaining brothers, and about a half a dozen of the gang's henchmen. They had taken off their jacket and hats and were lounging around and playing cards. And among them was John Bazzano's brother, Santo Bazzano. Shortly before 12:45 p.m., a dark blue Ford sedan motoring along Wiley Avenue pulled to the curb and stopped near the coffee shop, and 3 men wearing suits climbed out of the vehicle. One of the 3 men witnesses claimed was a large man with bushy eyebrows was Giuseppe Spinelli, aka Big Mike, a former Volpe friend and bodyguard who went to work for Bazzano. The identities of the other 2 men were uncertain, but all 3 men carried pistols, either 32 or 38 caliber. They began walking toward the coffee shop. At some point, John Volpe noticed them and turned to flee toward his car. Volpe drove a custom-designed light green 16-cylinder Cadillac coupe with bulletproof glass. But Volpe was either too late or too slow. One of the gunmen raised his weapon and fired. Then bullets found their mark and John Volpe fell near the curb. Then he was shot 5 more times from behind. One bullet broke his left arm, another ripped through his heart. The gunman entered the coffee shop. James Volpe rushed for safety, but was dropped by 3 bullets that struck him in the head, one tearing off part of his face. Arthur Volpe, sitting at a small round table in the back room eating a bowl of cornflakes, was interrupted by 2 bullets that entered the back of his head. As his cereal bowl crashed to the floor, the place became mayhem. Tables and chairs were knocked down as the half a dozen men who had been lounging around the shop bolted for the exits. Santo Bazzano ducked behind a steel counter. Once they were satisfied everyone was dead, the hitmen hastily exited the shop, and within moments, the 3 were back inside the Ford sedan and headed east. Outside the shop, traffic grounded to a halt, and within moments, a crowd of hundreds clogged the street 700 block as police rushed to the scene. The Volpe brothers were well-connected, politically influential, and often feared underworld bosses, and their midday assassination on a busy city street just a few blocks from the courthouse shocked Pittsburgh and marked the beginning of the end of what was perhaps the most violent and corrupt era of the city's history. The brazen triple homicide created a media frenzy. The Pittsburgh Press, which was keeping score, noted that the Volpe killings brought the number of unsolved gangland murders in the city to an even 100. Police swarmed over Wiley Avenue, ransacking businesses and buildings in search of suspects and clues. It was no use. The killers had disappeared, and apparently nobody saw a thing, because just like most Italian immigrant communities, nobody was talking. All the police had was Santo Bazzano. He was handcuffed and taken away for questioning. Like everyone else in the city, the police wanted to know who killed the Volpes and why. Santo Bazzano insisted he had no idea who killed his pals or put him on the spot. Of course, police wanted to speak to the proprietor of the coffee shop, Santo's brother, John Bazzano. Police then requested the interview, and Bazzano agreed to meet. John Bazzano, along with his attorney, who's also his brother-in-law, Frank Zappala, met with 2 detectives. The interview lasted 30 minutes. Bazzano told investigators he knew nothing about the murders. At the time of the shootings, Bazzano said he was tending to business in Midland Beaver County. Like his brother Santo, John Bazzano insisted the Volpes were his friends, and police saw no reason to detain him. After a few days of investigating, authorities were made aware of Bazzano's squabble with the Volpe brothers over territory and wanted to speak with him again. After looking for him, however, family members said Bazzano is gone, and they don't know where he is or when he'll be back. Little did they know, John Bazzano ain't ever coming back. Less than a week after the Volpe killings, Bazzano and 2 other men had been summoned to New York City by the recently formed Cosa Nostra Commission, the heads of the 5 families whose duty it was to arbitrate gangland disputes and, when needed, punish those who've gone astray. One of the men accompanying Bazzano was Big Mike Spinelli, one of the main triggermen in the Volpe killings. The other was most likely Joe Tito, the racketeer who was with John Volpe less than an hour before the hit. Law enforcement may have been clueless, but the Pittsburgh underworld knew all along who was behind the Volpe hit. John Bazzano. Well, it turned out a couple of these Volpe brothers were pretty smart guys. Instead of going after Bazzano when they were completely overmatched, they decided to go a different route. As you can imagine, the surviving brothers were furious. And then it occurred to one of them, didn't they just put together some kind of ruling body or commission or whatever with all these new rules? Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe they did. And wasn't one of those rules you can't go around killing other made guys without getting approval first? By golly, I think that was one of the rules. Louis, grab your fedora, we're going to New York. Two of the surviving Volpe brothers, Joseph and Louis, went to New York to plead their case to the newly established commission, arguing that Bazzano's unauthorized hits disrupted bootlegging alliances and invited federal attention. And of course, they didn't forget to appeal to their pride. They made sure to mention that Bazzano's blatant disregard for their rules undermined their authority and highlighted his lack of respect for the new national ruling body. This intervention underscored the need for a centralized authority to prevent chaotic wars that could erode overall profits and expose the underworld to prosecution, as localized bosses like Bazzano prioritized short-term dominance over long-term stability. It was decided that Bazzano would be held responsible for the unsanctioned killings. The ruling's interesting because normally a boss of a family doesn't need commission approval to whack out an underling in their own family. So maybe the dynamic of the relationship's different. I guess it's possible the Volpe brothers may belong to a different Borgata. Or maybe the rules evolved over time. Being one of the first rulings of the newly established commission, they needed to set the precedents and use this opportunity to show the underworld that there will be consequences for breaking these rules and make an example out of Bazzano. It's unclear exactly what occurred at the meeting. Reports state that Bazzano was brought before the commission and asked to defend his actions, which were unsanctioned by the big bosses. Bazzano, these reports state, was less than convincing. I'm not sure if he pled ignorance or if it was a preemptive self-defense or what his excuse was. What I do know is he didn't stand a chance. His fate was determined before the meeting even started. The commission couldn't afford to look weak or soft here. Anything less than an execution would have compromised their authority. So whatever Bazzano said probably didn't matter because even the perception of weakness could be detrimental this early in the game. They had to establish that there will be dire consequences if there's any infractions of these rules. They had to let the underworld know what'll happen, that these consequences will lead to one's violent death. I think Spinelli could sense what was happening, that no good could come from this trip to New York because him and Tito didn't stay long in the Big Apple. Bazzano, however, was called to a meeting August 6th and traveled to an abandoned building in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. Shit, that should have been his first clue, ain't nobody having to sit down in an abandoned building. Then a couple days later, in the pre-dawn darkness of August 8th, a 19-year-old man walking to his Brooklyn home discovered a large burlap bag near a refuse pile. Well, he took a peek in the bag and made a grisly discovery. Inside the bag was a body of a middle-aged white male with his arms and legs bound by a rope. A blood-stained white handkerchief was stuffed in his mouth, and rope burns marred the neck. An autopsy would reveal the man had been stabbed over 20 times with an ice pick. It also revealed that the man was John Bazzano. The Commission's role in sanctioning Bazzano's death ushered in a new chapter for the American Mafia and highlighted a shift towards stricter oversight, effectively dismantling his faction and curtailing the Volpe's regional autonomy as surviving Volpe members were marginalized or integrated under new oversight. This new national authority proved effective. The Commission stepping in to finally quell the warfare once and for all turned things around in Pittsburgh. From that point forward, underworld peace prevailed, and Pittsburgh would slowly flip its unstable underworld reputation around. Within a few years, the Pittsburgh crime family would gain a viable reputation for its quiet stability and profit-making abilities, while generally avoiding police scrutiny and a public outcry for law and order. Meanwhile, Spinelli was feeling the heat. He probably assumed the Commission was going to dispatch a hit team out for him. I'm sure they knew he was involved. Plus, it was apparent that law enforcement was closing in. He knew Pittsburgh was getting too hot for him and he had to go. Newspaper reports indicated Spinelli eventually fled to Canada, then traveled by ship to Italy. There, in the town of Agripoli, he was united with his mother, wife, and 2 children. Then, on November 23, 1932, he was arrested by Italian authorities. Pennsylvania officials asked for Spinelli's extradition, but the Italian Minister of Justice said no. Big Mike would be tried in Italy. Then, in December 1935, he was convicted and sentenced to 30 years. Vincenzo Capizzi assumed leadership of the Pittsburgh family in the immediate aftermath, initiating a reorganization that emphasized alliances with New York interests and reduced intra-family violence. This power realignment ended the most violent era in the long history of the Pittsburgh Borgata and squashed all the Prohibition-era rivalries in Pittsburgh, redirecting resources from feuds to diversified rackets while aligning the family with national mafia hierarchies. And it turned out that Lou and Joe Volpe were pretty good racketeers. They were quickly accepted and absorbed into the newly restructured Pittsburgh crime family. But out of the two, Lou would be the one who would stand out. Lou Volpe's talent was quickly recognized, and he soon rose to capo position in their brigada, with his specialty being the illegal gambling rackets. Vincenzo Capizzi was the family's head from 1933 to 1937 when he resigned. Capizzi's successor was Frank Amato. Amato began expanding his influence over gambling rackets in or around Allegheny County and formed a strong alliance with Vito Genovese and his crime family in New York City, who represented Pittsburgh at commission meetings. Frank Amato and Vito Genovese were compadres of sorts, which translated into English means best man or close male friend. They were both Napolitani by birth and both born in the same little town of Rocca, Italy, right outside of Naples. And yeah, I had to Google how to say that correctly. This bond with a fellow Camarista would serve Amato very well through the years by helping him avoid trouble amongst his peers. Even the unspoken threat of his murderous compadre Vito waiting in the wings was usually more than enough to maintain order amongst the troops and keep Amato safe from potential trouble. In fact, it was allegedly Genovese who helped Amato rise to become the representante of the Pittsburgh family after all the killing was over. And during this time, the Mafia was making a nationwide push to infiltrate unions, and Vito was urging Amato to take over all these labor unions in Pittsburgh. During his reign, he tried desperately to infiltrate the unions of the steelworkers, and apparently it's easier said than done because Amato didn't know what he was doing. You would think Vito might take a page out of Tommy Lucchese's playbook and physically show him what to do. Tommy, Three-Finger Brown Lucchese, and LA crime boss Jack Dragna were very good friends. When Lucchese noticed that the LA family was struggling to infiltrate and manipulate labor unions, he wanted to help his buddy out. He did the best and most generous thing he possibly could. He loaned him Johnny Dio. He dispatched his top and prolific labor racketeer Johnny DioGuardi to California. Johnny Dio was sent to Los Angeles to specifically train Jack Dragna's nephew, Louis Tom Dragna, on how to extort and manipulate the unions, specifically the Los Angeles Garment District. The training successfully transformed Louis into an immensely profitable labor racketeer. For more on that, check out my video on the LA family. Nah, Vito ain't gonna do none of that. At the end of the day, Vito only cares about Vito. So Amato and his men desperately tried to infiltrate unions, but their efforts were met with very little success. Amato ruled till 1956 when he fell ill from a kidney ailment, and then he stepped down to become underboss. Then Sebastiano John LaRocca assumed control of the Pittsburgh crime family when longtime boss Frank Amato finally got out of the way, marking the beginning of a nearly 3-decade tenure characterized by operational discretion and economic focus. Born in Villa Rosa, Sicily on May 1, 1901, LaRocca and his family immigrated to the United States in 1910 and settled in Indiana County, Pennsylvania. As a young man, LaRocca went to work in the coal mines. In 1922, at age 20, he was arrested for assaulting a young woman and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. He eventually got drawn into Pittsburgh's criminal underworld and became an excellent racketeer. His gifted intelligence and high-level business acumen set him apart from the rest of the Steel City wise guys. LaRocca quickly became a top family earner and largely avoided conflict. He was very well liked and became a well-connected mafioso. It became abundantly clear that LaRocca was head and shoulders above his peers, and for him, the sky was the limit. Once he became boss, LaRocca, often known as Big John, leveraged his experience in bootlegging and gambling to steer the organization toward less violent, profit-oriented activities, including numbers rackets, loan sharking, extortion, jukebox and coin machine monopoly rackets, and infiltration of labor unions and steel and construction industries, something Amato was unable to do. Over the next 60-some-odd years, what became known as the John LaRocca family successfully operated behind the curtains, so to speak. FBI files state that LaRocca brought a new mindset to the Pittsburgh underworld when he came on the scene. Before LaRocca, LCN members would just sit back and count their money. They relied on musclemen and stooges to operate their gambling clubs. LaRocca forced LCN members to work and become actively engaged in the administration of the numerous gambling establishments themselves. According to informant testimony, LaRocca had conflict resolution skills that were way ahead of its time. He preferred negotiation and compromise over murder and violence. He tried to resolve grievances without bloodshed, and the effort showed. Pittsburgh had fewer gangland killings than all the other mob cities, and most believe that's because of this type of attitude. LaRocca would only use violence as a last resort. After all the bloodshed from the 1920s and 30s, Pittsburgh didn't have another mafia-related killing till the 1960s. Although always one of the smallest families numerically by Cosa Nostra standards, the LaRocca family nonetheless engaged in most organized crime rackets, in addition to his ability to successfully enact police bribery and political corruption. LaRocca was disciplined, cautious, and calculating. Unlike other mobsters who craved headlines, he craved longevity. As law enforcement cracked down on loud, violent figures, LaRocca flew under the radar, quietly building influence, avoiding messy wars, and making all the right connections. His crime family wasn't marked by shootouts in the streets. It was marked by quiet intimidation, political influence, and economic entrenchment. LaRocca's organization wasn't flashy, but it was effective. Their territory covered all of western Pennsylvania, parts of eastern Ohio, and parts of West Virginia. The Pittsburgh mob kept its operations tightly knit and deeply local. By maintaining tight-knit, localized control over territories in southwestern Pennsylvania, including Pittsburgh and surrounding steel towns, the family expanded its revenue streams without aggressive territorial grabs, relying instead on established networks for gambling operations that generated steady income amid post-prohibition economic shifts. LaRocca's approach fostered organizational stability, avoiding those messy conflicts that weaken rival families, and positioned the Pittsburgh family as one of the more financially robust smaller syndicates within Cosa Nostra, despite its limited size relative to larger eastern families. At their 1950s and 60s peak, the inducted rank-and-file membership of the LaRocca family probably never exceeded more than 25 to 30 members. His leadership emphasized blending illicit gangs with legitimate businesses, such as vending machine operations and real estate holdings, which facilitated money laundering and provided a veneer of respectability. Labor racketeering formed a core pillar of the family's operations, leveraging Pittsburgh's industrial base to infiltrate unions in construction, steel mills, and related trades. Mob associates secured positions as union officials or influencers, demanding kickbacks from contractors for labor contracts, no-show jobs for family members, and inflated wage scales that funneled funds back to the organization. John LaRocca was highly respected coast to coast and worked with the most powerful criminals in the country. He worked closely with several bosses including Carlo Gambino of New York City, Angelo Bruno of Philadelphia, Russell Buffalino of Pittston, with extensive dealings with Nick Savella of Kansas City and Santo Trafficante Jr. of Tampa. Because of his character, integrity, business acumen, and financial prowess, LaRocca was often sought after for various business partnerships. Everyone knew John could come up with the necessary capital, and he could always be counted on to do the right thing. LaRocca and his top capo, Kelly Manorino, partnered with Trafficante in the Gloria Sanssouci Hotel and Casino in Havana, Cuba. LaRocca cultivated lucrative interstate gambling networks, partnering with Kansas City boss Nick Savella to expand bookmaking on horse racing and sports events, leveraging Pittsburgh's industrial workforce for steady wagering funds. And illegal casinos proliferated on the city's outskirts during the 1950s and 60s. No doubt John LaRocca is a first ballot Hall of Fame mobster. He checked all the boxes. He was an expert racketeer, a master corrupter, and a discreet low-key operator. He's a shining example for any up-and-coming wise guy and the benchmark for a boss. So it's no surprise that LaRocca had a stable of some elite top-flight mobsters under him. The Pittsburgh crime family embodied the expression quality over quantity. Not a large organization by no means, but they're effective and efficient. LaRocca had some major heavyweights as his main lieutenants. His number two, his longtime partner in crime, the Pittsburgh family underboss, a position he kept from the late 50s to LaRocca's death in December of '84, Michael Genovese. Equipped with a good bit of mafia pedigree due to being a cousin of mafia legend and former boss of the family that still bears his name, Vito Genovese, Michael chose a life of crime as a career path when he was just a teenager. Born April 19, 1919 in East Liberty, Pennsylvania, Michael grew up poor in a rough and grimy neighborhood. Not much is known about his childhood or parents, although files revealed that Mrs. Genovese was arrested in the 1930s for making moonshine. Although hardly imposing at 5'8", 165 pounds, Genovese boxed when he was young and worked as a bodyguard for mobsters. He was known to be good with his hands and a knife, and he would also carry around a pool cue filled with lead that he would use to crack guys over the head. Ain't no telling if he actually shot pool with it. His first brush with the law came in 1936 when he was just 17 years old and when he was arrested on the East End for beating up and robbing a man of $4. His only other arrest was in 1945 for carrying a concealed pistol and a blackjack in Youngstown. Informants told the FBI that he wanted to get caught so he could avoid military service. And it worked. As a young man, he found work in a concrete company run by LaRocca. Then from there, he began working as a runner in LaRocca's numbers racket. LaRocca took a shine to the young budding mobster and brought him into the family ranks early on in his life. He would go to work for LaRocca at various establishments, primarily the North Star Cement Block Company and the L&G Amusement Company. Genovese was used to force bar owners to install their company's jukeboxes. Then Genovese went from working at a vending machine company to owning one when he and LaRocca went into business together in a massive company providing jukeboxes to all of western Pennsylvania and parts of Ohio and West Virginia. Genovese was one of the youngest guys to ever get inducted into the Pittsburgh Borgata. LaRocca, an old-fashioned Sicilian, favored Genovese because of his clean habits. He was fastidious in every aspect. He was said to be very detail-oriented and wanted everything neat and clean, from his shiny shoes to his manicured nails. I'm sure LaRocca also took a liking to him because Michael once hit on a number for 60 grand and gave LaRocca half. Michael Genovese was old school in many respects. He was a natty dresser, unfailingly polite, and discreet in his dealings. Exactly what you would expect from an apprentice of LaRocca. Yet at heart he was a cheap, greedy street hood from East Liberty who never strayed far from those roots. Genovese reportedly didn't want to pay for anything. The FBI had information that he directed a county employee to steal curbstones and jersey barriers from a county storage facility. Aerial photos later showed the barriers shoring up hillside on Genovese's property, and the curbstones were on his driveway. Nevertheless, LaRocca once called Mike polished, sincere, and ultra-conservative. But he still is a mafiosi. He cheated on his wives and enjoyed gambling, but he seemed to have better control over his vices than most of his fellow wise guys. Genovese was focused and about his business. He never let shenanigans affect his responsibilities, and this made him very reliable. So once he got his button, he rose through the ranks pretty quick. In 1954, he put up 19 grand to buy into Archie's Car Wash on Bennett Street in Homewood, which became his gambling headquarters. That car wash actually did good business. Even though it was a front and Genovese used it as a base of operations and to launder money, he took the business seriously and it thrived. And it also functioned as a sort of headquarters or meeting place for the whole family. Multiple FBI surveillance photos have surfaced of Pittsburgh wise guys being pictured at the car wash. He also owned a few hotels he used to launder money, and they actually did pretty well. He even chartered buses to the 1960 World Series games at Forbes Field and also to Steelers and Pitt football games. Then he started rapidly moving up in the ranks. Genovese managed key operations including gambling and labor racketeering and was a key figure in control of all numbers racket operations in the East Liberty district of Pittsburgh. Genovese was also instrumental in the family's expansion into West Virginia and Ohio territories. Michael knew when to keep his mouth shut and was willing to get locked up over it. In the 1970s, he was jailed for refusing to testify before a federal grand jury investigating organized crime in western Pennsylvania. Genovese was an aggressive, effective, and experienced racketeer. He would serve in a couple ruling panels when LaRocca's health was declining. Genovese's loyal service would finally pay off when John LaRocca kicked the bucket in December of '84, and he finally became the head honcho. LaRocca's other top lieutenant was Gabriel Manarino, but his friends called him Kelly. Manarino was a top LaRocca capo and was also included on a ruling panel when LaRocca was getting sick, but more so functioned as LaRocca's personal consigliere, providing strategic counsel on disputes and alliances, including ties to other Midwestern families. For the upwards of 5 decades, he and his older brother Sammy played pivotal roles within the Borgata as resident caretakers and overseers for the city of New Kensington, Pennsylvania, one of the most lucrative territories under the family's jurisdiction. The Mannarino brothers controlled all forms of illegal enterprise in the town from the 1930s through the 1960s. Their major interests were gambling, specifically numbers games and illegal casinos. Viewed as a very capable and loyal member, the ever-ambitious Kelly Mannarino controlled New Kensington and its outer neighborhoods with an iron fist on behalf of the LaRocca family. Aside from Genovese, Kelly Mannarino is considered LaRocca's right-hand man for many years, but interestingly, it was his older brother Sam who would first get their foot in the door with the Mafia. The Mannarino brothers' parents were Italian immigrants who first settled in Pittsburgh, and then around 1914 they moved to New Kensington, where they owned and operated a grocery store. Like many other Italian immigrant families, their dad, John Canto, started a side hustle manufacturing bootleg alcohol. Apparently, his sons not only helped out in the family grocery store, but also with his bootleg alcohol side business, helping supplement their family income by becoming another family of alky cookers. We know this because in 1926, John Canto and his oldest son Sam were arrested for operating a still in the back of the Mannarino home. It's unclear whether these men were working for the mob or independently, as both options were typical for the period. So like many other young Italians during Prohibition, Samuel Mannarino began his career by manufacturing and selling bootleg alcohol, but with Sam, it all started with his father. Sam got himself established in the local underworld, moving up in the bootlegging business, but his ambition was crippled because at the time a Greek immigrant named Mike Zervos was the local crime boss and ran the New Kensington rackets. Because of Zervos' hold on the town, there was no opportunity for Sam to bring his brand of illegal enterprise to the city. Instead, Sam moved into the Pittsburgh bootlegging world and branched out into associated criminal activities under the tutelage of older, more experienced Pittsburgh gangsters. Then his life completely changed when he got lucky and was selected to be the chauffeur for Mafia Don John Bazzano. Sam picked up the boss every morning and drove him around Pittsburgh, running errands and meeting gangsters. Mannarino once recalled that Bazzano's old associates all had handlebar mustaches. He said Bazzano was fond of him and helped him out in his criminal career. But when Bazzano was killed, Mannarino reportedly said he had it coming and he felt no pity for him. Sam began to move up the ranks, and he reportedly helped the Pittsburgh crime family muscle into gambling clubs in the 1920s and 30s. They would intimidate and force owners to take him on as partners. They would usually pay the owner a fair price, or they got their quote-unquote head broken. In 1927, he served a year and a half in a federal penitentiary for extortion while impersonating a federal prohibition officer, but the time in federal prison did not dampen Sam's drive. Through the 1920s and 30s, several arrests marked his professional progress. During this period, the Pittsburgh family's line of succession shifted from John Bazzano to Vincent Capizzi to Frank Amato. Sam eventually caught the attention of Amato's second-in-command, John LaRocca. LaRocca would take Sam under his wing and mentor the young up-and-coming gangster. This separated Sam from the rest of the rank-and-file soldiers, because as LaRocca's apprentice, Sam was under the spotlight. Apparently, he didn't mind the attention because he was out there shining. Sam settled in an enforcement role and quickly gained the reputation for his ability to crack some heads. By the 1930s, Sam was a seasoned strong-arm man and was quite knowledgeable about the structure and maintenance of a criminal syndicate. He found his opportunity to advance in 1928 as New Kensington's underworld went into a freefall when Zervos was convicted of murder and sent to prison. Sam was more than happy to fill the vacuum and seize the opportunity. He stepped in to take control of New Kensington's rackets with the financial backing of LaRocca and other Pittsburgh mob leaders. And this was about the time Sam's younger brother Gabriel hit the scene. Sam taught young Gabriel the ins and outs of criminality and how to run and manage their rackets, and the younger Mannarino quickly became a force in the local underworld. And then in time, Sam shared control over New Kensington with his brother Gabriel. Then, for the next 30 years, New Kensington was considered a wide-open town where illegal gambling was largely tolerated by the community and protected by local government and law enforcement. The size of the community, government officials' openness to corruption, the Mannarino's brothers' social mobility, and the residents' permissive attitudes all allowed illegal gambling to flourish. By the 1940s, the Mannarinos controlled all phases of gambling in New Kensington and Westmoreland County. As one of the most powerful young franchises in western Pennsylvania, the success of their organization relied on their ability to successfully influence local politicians, control law enforcement, and move across various social lines in the community. The numbers racket was the most widespread and financially successful of the gambling enterprises, but New Kensington was also known for its horse rooms and carpet joints. With money to spend, many people saw gambling, from church bingo to illegal casinos, as an acceptable leisure activity. Kefauver Committee findings indicate that during the early 1950s, gambling was a $20 billion a year business with an estimated 50 million gamblers across the country. It was alleged that by 1954, New Kensington was so wide open that the top members of the Mannarino organization were collectively netting $43,000 a week. As with other such syndicates in the post-war period, gambling appears to have been the organization's lifeblood. And at some point, Kelly Mannarino shot up the ranks like a cannon. The rackets he was managing were thriving, and everyone seemed to like him. He became LaRocca's golden boy and one of his top lieutenants. Kelly garnered favor from the boss and quickly leapfrogged his brother, becoming a rising star in the family. Becoming more prominent comes with more responsibility, and more responsibility comes with a promotion. Kelly Mannarino would get the bump to capo regime and become the crime king of New Kensington. Mannarino also operated a few different New Kensington businesses, including the Katoris Candy Company, S&S Distributing Company, New Ken Novelty Company, and they also own a scrap metal business, Ken Iron and Steel Company. Kelly had the town on lock. He ruled New Kensington with an iron fist. Nothing happened in that town without Kelly Mannarino's say-so. Kelly paid off the cops, hand-picked politicians, and granted favors for those who bent the knee and kissed the ring. To the citizens of New Kensington, Kelly Mannarino was truly thought of as their local Mafia Don, their godfather. He completely owned the town and was considered the king of Kensington. Kelly Mannarino also began overseeing the Wheeling, West Virginia faction, applying widespread union extortion and forced hiring schemes in the area. And Kelly eventually became the highest earning captain in the family. His regime became so large it resembled and operated almost as an independent family unto itself. Kelly Mannarino became nationally recognized when LaRocca used him as the family's point man to Cuba, as Cosa Nostra expanded its reach during the 1940s and 50s into Havana, Cuba's multi-million-dollar legalized gambling industry in partnership with Cuban dictator Batista. He was rubbing elbows with the big boys now. Like I mentioned earlier, Mannarino was a partner in the San Souci Hotel Casino with boss LaRocca and Tampa boss Santo Trafficante. Then it got to the point where Batista got too greedy and upped his required cut of the gambling proceeds. Apparently he wanted ridiculously high tribute payments. Then when he got some resistance from Mannarino, he began to muscle Mannarino and Trafficante out of the San Souci Casino. Then Mannarino and his partners made an ill-advised decision by trying to regain control of their casinos by betting on Fidel Castro to restore ownership once he gained power. And things did not work out the way he was hoping. Some mobsters were hedging their bets with both Castro and Batista, just in case. Kelly, on the other hand, despised Batista at that point and bet all his chips on Castro. So much so, he tried to help arm his Cuban rebels with machine guns. He actually dispatched some of his guys to go rob an Ohio National Guard armory, which they did, of a few hundred machine guns and army rifles. And he was going to send them over to Castro during the height of the Castro-Batista struggle for control of the island. Somehow law enforcement got wise to their play because in November of '58, 6 men thought no one was watching as they loaded burlap bags onto a twin-engine Beechcraft at West Deer Airstrip. As the plane took off, troopers hiding nearby moved in to arrest the men. And when the aircraft landed in Morgantown, West Virginia, it was seized. There were a total of 317 weapons inside those burlap bags, from .50 caliber machine guns to M1 carbines, destined for Fidel Castro's campaign to control Cuba. Now this is a bad look for Mannarino. It was evident to officials he was involved. A panel truck owned by a vending machine company that he owned was seen at the site. Plus, one of the busted gun smugglers was Sam Mannarino's son-in-law, Victor Carlucci. Another one of the gun runners was Daniel Speedo Hanna. He's a Pittsburgh mob associate who worked in a Mannarino gambling den in New Kensington. The third guy was Norman Rothman, their man in Havana. He's the guy they used to manage the San Souci. Then to make things worse, on New Year's Day 1959, Castro rode into town with his army of rebels and took over. Batista immediately hightailed it out of Cuba. Castro then showed his true colors and reneged on any deals he may have had with the mob. His rebels ransacked the casinos and Castro closed them permanently and kicked the mob off the island, costing them millions of dollars that they had invested in various casinos and hotels. Although Mannarino has been arrested several times, prosecutors could not convict him of a federal crime. In 1957, he was cleared of charges that he tried to bribe a witness in a New Kensington vote fraud trial. In 1963, he was acquitted of income tax fraud, and in 1970, he and 10 others beat a conspiracy and racketeering case involving kickbacks from a Teamsters Union pension fund. What really solidified him as a part of the upper echelon of the American Mafia was his attendance in the infamous 1957 Appalachian meeting in upstate New York. Representing the Pittsburgh Borgata was of course the boss, John LaRocca, and his top two lieutenants, Michael Genovese and Kelly Manarino. Interestingly, all three of them darted in the woods to try to escape the law when they got raided. Somehow LaRocca managed to get away, while Genovese and Manarino were included in the 62 mobsters that ended up getting arrested. Not long after the Cuban fiasco, Sam was getting into shenanigans as well. On May 4th, 1958, he, along with Norman Rothman, since he lost his casino gig in Havana, he was readily available for some mob mishaps, and Chicago's William Rabin drove north into Ontario, Canada, and robbed Brockville Trust and Savings Bank of $12 million in Canadian bonds, cash, and jewelry. The FBI collabed with Canadian authorities, which led to a breakthrough in the case that was considered America's largest theft at the time, and led to the arrest of the three gangsters. Tony Repepe was a staple in the Pittsburgh Mafia and could best be categorized as an old-school mustache Pete-type mafioso, one who adhered closely to the old-world customs of the honored society back in Calabria. He was believed to be a member of the old Black Hand extortion rings operating in the early decades of the 1900s before the formation of Cosa Nostra in America. He was there from the beginning and held a position as one of the most senior and important capodecinas in the Pittsburgh Mafia for decades. Repepe was a notorious mafioso, well known to all in the underworld, locally, nationally, and internationally. Repepe started out working as a bus driver in the 1930s for his brother Angelo's bus company. On the side, he was running numbers for the older neighborhood gangsters. Repepe's first brush with law enforcement came in June of 1938 when he was arrested in Gallatin while carrying more than 1,000 number slips. Repepe shimmied up the ranks pretty quick. By the 1940s, he ran his own numbers operations in Allegheny, Fayette, and Washington counties. Repepe was also in the jukebox business. The coin vending enterprise was a flimsy cover for distributing slot machines throughout the region. Repepe's longtime partnership with John LaRocca began with numbers and slot machines. According to the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, Repepe was a capo in the southwestern Pennsylvania branch of Cosa Nostra. But his association wasn't just business, it was also family. Repepe's daughter was married to John Bazzano Jr., another prominent figure in the Pittsburgh Mafia that was the son of old Pittsburgh Mafia Don John Bazzano Sr. His other son-in-law was Costanze Stan Valente, former boss of the Rochester family. Repepe was nothing short of a Pittsburgh legend. He was one of the most feared and respected capos in Pittsburgh for many years and was an enormous earner. He was making millions with his vending machines alone. His vending machine business happened to be the largest vending machine company in western Pennsylvania and did over $6 million a year. And that's on top of the couple mil he was making with his numbers racket. And he was also making a mint with his gambling and loan sharking rackets. This guy was rolling in the dough. Repepe had an incredible business sense and invested a bunch of his illicit earnings into legitimate businesses. He owned a cement block company that did over $12 million a year. See, the thing is, most people have never even heard of this guy, but he quietly amassed a fortune between his legitimate and illegitimate businesses. That fact alone, that he was a highly successful racketeer and not very many people know about him, highlights his ability to operate in the shadows and under the radar. Because of his importance to the family, LaRocca was sure to include Repepe in a ruling panel along with Genovese and Manarino that ruled the family from 1973 to 1978. Repepe was a top-notch mafioso who operated at the highest levels while largely avoiding incarceration. Antonio Repepe died in 2000 at the age 98, a free man surrounded by his family, and he was reportedly still getting envelopes through a son-in-law up until the day he died. Joseph Jojo Pecora was a pivotal figure in the Pittsburgh Mafia. Starting as a numbers runner in East Liberty, this mob journeyman was a fan favorite and always stayed relatable to the rank and file during his rise to the top of the family ranks before settling in as underboss. With a keen eye for business and unshakable loyalty to his boss, Pecora managed everything from sports betting to gambling dens to Las Vegas-style casinos. Born on December 12, 1919, Jojo, like several of his mob buddies, started out as a numbers runner before he began managing the Old Jockey Club in Chester, West Virginia. Headquartered at McFinn's jewelry shop in East Liberty, Pecora operated a massive numbers racket along with Genovese that spanned from East Liberty section of Pittsburgh into West Virginia. They had 10 numbers spots littered all over the area, with their headquarters on the corner of Sheridan Place next to the Sheridan Theater in East Liberty. Pecora was also in charge of all sports betting in the Pittsburgh area. JoJo distributed football pool sheets to all their bookies and high-end gambling customers. According to reports, the player has to bet at least $100, but can bet up to no limit. The sheet has all the NFL football matchups for the week, and the player has to pick 4 out of 4 correctly to win. Football season was by far their busiest and most lucrative season, followed by basketball. JoJo was a longtime captain of the family who was performing underboss duties for a while before officially receiving the title at the tail end of LaRocca's tenure in 1983 and held on to it until 1987. He also served in a ruling panel, taking Repepe's spot when he stepped down from 1978 to 1980 when LaRocca's health was declining. Despite his high-ranking mob status, he was known as a man of the people. Sources state Pecora was a down-to-earth, fun-loving, well-liked guy who generally avoided violence until absolutely necessary. He was also known for a sense of humor and always having a smile on his face. Pecora moved to West Virginia in 1965 to manage a new casino they opened in Chester called the Red Dog Casino. Then when he moved his base of operations to Chester, West Virginia, he began managing all illegal gambling rackets in West Virginia and the Panhandle. Eventually, LaRocca would promote him to captain and put Pecora in charge of all the family's illegal enterprise they had going in West Virginia. JoJo specialized in gambling, but he also helped manage the family's extortion, loan sharking, labor racketeering, and all the other rackets they had going over there. Once promoted to underboss, Pecora's role involved coordinating with all the capitals and regional factions, reflecting the family's decentralized structure. Some sources state that JoJo was actually chosen to be John LaRocca's successor, but he had to serve a 5-year bid in federal prison for a RICO conviction. Who knows how true that is. Pecora for a long time was considered the heart and soul of the Pittsburgh Mafia, so it was a sad day in the Steel City when he died March 3, 1987, at the age of 67 following heart surgery. Joseph Regino, aka Little Joe Ragno, was a quiet force in the LaRocca family for over 5 decades. From his early days in Johnstown to becoming one of LaRocca's favorite captains, Regino built a racketeering empire that spanned gambling, slot machines, extortion, and vast political connections. But beneath his calm demeanor was a man who could order violence as easy as we order out. Backed by his fearsome reputation, Little Joe Ragno, capable of extreme violence, always let his actions do the talking for him. And Joe had a diversified gambling racket portfolio. He had his hand in many pots. He was a major bookie who had loads of joker poker and slot machines in almost every bar and hotel in Pittsburgh. He managed a few floating dice and poker games and had an interest in a couple casinos. Needless to say, Regino was a massive earner, and LaRocca seemed to really like him because they were often seen out and about together. Joe was also considered by some to be the family's fixer. He had an inept ability to compromise officials. Over the years, he's built himself up a stable of corrupt police officers, politicians, and judges, providing him with an array of connections, giving him the ability to fix precarious and sensitive situations. His blend of violence, earning ability, and political connections made Joe Regino a valuable asset to the family, securing his place as one of the Pittsburgh mob's most influential figures. Some of the more prominent LaRocca capos included Louis Volpe, one of the surviving Volpe brothers who was absorbed into the Pittsburgh Borgata and proved to be a very competent wise guy. He was an exceptional racketeer who specialized in gambling. Lou was also well liked amongst his comrades and became a staple in the Borgata. LaRocca eventually promoted him to captain and put him in charge of illegal gambling operations in Pittsburgh, and Lou served as underboss for a decade. When LaRocca was having health issues and went with a ruling panel, he made Lou second in command from 1969 until he stepped down in 1979. Apparently, he preferred to be a skipper. And Louis' top aide and trusted right-hand man was Joe Sica, a decades-long inducted member of the Pittsburgh Mafia. Sica was well-liked and respected amongst his peers and was a top earner for the family. He would rise to a capo position himself and control all the rackets in Penn Hills. LaRocca had several key earners, but what about his muscle? Enter Louis Raucci. Raucci emerged as a key soldier in the Pittsburgh crime family during the mid-20th century, serving faithfully under LaRocca. He engaged in the more violent side of organized crime. This master of intimidation performed several bombings, beatings, baseball bat beatdowns, and of course the occasional murder. His criminal record included shootouts with police and other violent enforcement activities, establishing him as a heavyweight enforcer within the organization. He would also partake in armed robberies and bank heists. He was one of the family's top extortionists, and as he got older, he became a halfway decent labor racketeer, and he would eventually take over Sika's Penn Hills rackets in the mid-80s. The always wise Charlie Murgy Imbruglia served as the voice of reason for both LaRocca and Genovese. Imbruglia started his criminal career in Pittsburgh as a Shylock and took part in extortion and other various schemes and robberies. He became a damn good, well-rounded criminal and eventually earned his button sometime in the 60s. It didn't take long after that until he became one of the top loan sharks in the city. He also started a sports book and ran other gambling rackets. He would eventually relocate to Ohio and control just about all criminal enterprise in Trumbull County. Charlie lived in Warren, Ohio, just outside Youngstown, and his son-in-law owns the largest bingo supply distributor in the country, called Nanacola Inc. Then LaRocca made him his consigliere in 1973, and he held down that position until he stepped down in 1980. Charlie reportedly gave sound advice and was often used by the boss to advise in internal matters, omerta enforcement, and to settle disputes. Apparently he was good at working out compromises that both parties were satisfied with. Michael Genovese really valued his counsel because when he became the official boss in '84, he immediately promoted Imbruglia back into the administration as his consigliere, and this time he stayed put until his death in '02. Next up, Anthony Wango Capizzi. Capizzi was often described by law enforcement as middle management of the Pittsburgh LCN family. When you take a peek into his history, it seemed like Capizzi was always on the move in his early days. He worked at the Aloha restaurant, a mob hotspot in Pittsburgh. He had a long record of involvement in nightclub operations and over the years was involved in numerous after-hours clubs and other seedy businesses. And interestingly, the Pennsylvania Crime Commission noted that he was the president of a talent booking agency called Full House Productions. Capizzi was frequently seen and oftentimes pictured visiting LaRocca and other mobsters at various mob hangouts throughout Pittsburgh. LaRocca eventually sent him out west to manage the family's interests in Las Vegas, but while he was out there, it seems he was more involved with the Buffalino family than his own. The Crime Commission said his biggest illegal enterprise was arranging gambling junkets to Las Vegas for various members of the Buffalino family, and he had a real knack working those junket schemes. In the early 1980s, he tried to become a licensed junketeer, but was unable to get a license because of a credit card scam he ran in the Tropicana Casino in Las Vegas. Despite being a career criminal with his reputation, Capizzi for the most part skated by without any major arrests or indictments and managed to compile a minimal criminal record. Believe it or not, his sole conviction was a shoplifting pinch he took in 1968 while in Florida. Despite barely knowing his father, John Bazzano Jr. would still end up following in his footsteps, becoming a prominent underworld figure in Pittsburgh. Jr. was 5 years old when his father was ice-picked to death in New York. When John got his organized crime career going, he went to work under the tutelage of legendary Pittsburgh capo Antonio Repepi. For years, Bazzano ran numbers in Monongahela Valley for Repepi. He would eventually marry Repepi's daughter, tying the two Sicilian families together and making his mentor now his father-in-law. Bazzano would eventually branch out, operating several gambling rackets and a massive sports book. And there was no doubt he had that mafiosi blood coursing through his veins because he was a natural racketeer. His gambling rackets not only thrived, they were generating millions. And with an operation that big, it's just a matter of time before law enforcement catches on. Bazzano would get pinched in the mid-70s, accused of running a huge gambling ring that paid protection money to Monongahela Valley police and public officials. During his federal trial in 1976, he presented himself as a law-abiding family man who served honorably in the Army in World War II and always paid his taxes. But the FBI begged to differ. They claimed he was not a law-abiding family man, but a damn dirty mobster, and the leader of a gambling operation that stretched 3 counties and 2 states and brought in $2 to $3 million a year. And interestingly, all the other defendants involved with Bazzano's gambling business were public officials. Except Bazzano, of course. Bazzano's the only wise guy who went down in this case, which highlights the fact that he's solid. He honored his oath and kept his mouth shut. Like a good mafioso, Bazzano denied he was ever in the numbers business and denied any links to organized crime. But the jury wasn't dumb, and he was convicted, along with a mayor, a magistrate, 2 police chiefs, and a constable, and handed a 7-year stretch. Bazzano was paroled in 1981, and after his release, he ostensibly worked at Keystone Music Company, a vending machine business in Pleasant Hills owned by Repepi. But his actual job, according to the Crime Commission, was running rackets and being the right-hand man to Michael Genovese. Then in 1987, Genovese promoted him to underboss, following the death of Jojo Pecora. And them prosecutors be hating. They were throwing shots his way when a Justice Department lawyer said at the time of Pecora's death that Bazzano didn't exhibit the same leadership qualities as his famous father. And somebody's gonna have to remind me why Bazzano Sr. is considered famous. He was the boss for 1 whole year, and when the commission was formed, he immediately broke a rule and was whacked. What an illustrious career he had.